10 years ago today, the artificial intelligence created to protect us detonated a nuclear warhead in Los Angeles.
When the war started, they protected me. Took better care of me than humans would have.
They're not people, Maya. It's just programming.
This is a fight for our very existence.
Let's move.
Hi, I'm Heath Firestone with CinemaTechnica.com.
And hi, I'm Marc Loftus, editor of Post Magazine. Today we're going to be speaking about a new film that's coming out from 20th Century Studios, The Creator. It'll be released on September 29th, and Heath and I both had a chance to see the film in advance and have some initial thoughts on it. Post also has coverage with director Gareth Edwards, interviewed by Ian Blair, and by the team at ILM, interviewed by Kendra Ruzak, my colleague who's the editor of CGW. So we've got a lot coming up in both the magazine and up on our website. And this podcast is going to be the beginning of what we hope is going to be a two-part series. We're going to talk more matter-of-factly about the making of the film here without giving away any spoilers. And then in our second part, Kendra's going to join us, talk a little more specifically about ILM's work, and maybe we'll get into specific scenes and some of the storyline as well. Yeah.
I don't know about you, Mark, but a couple months ago, I didn't even know that this film existed. And at SIGGRAPH, Kendra and I got invited to the Pixar's Render Man event, and we got to see like a 5 or 10 minute clip from the movie. Got to see a Q&A, well, more of an interview style thing with Gareth Edwards and Jay Cooper, the visual effects supervisor from ILM on The Creator. And then we spoke to Gareth afterwards briefly. And ever since, I've been extremely excited to see this film. In fact, I probably haven't been this excited to see a film in well over a decade. So
I agree. This film wasn't necessarily on my radar initially, and then late in the summer, you started seeing a lot of promotion for it. I heard about your conversations and the exposure at SIGGRAPH. I've seen a lot of spots and stuff on TV, and luckily, we've had access to the different components of the filmmaking process there to find out more about it. So that I know a little bit more now than I did a few weeks ago, having read a couple of articles, having been involved in the interview process. So yeah, I'm curious to hear your thoughts. We've both seen it. So what's your initial thought on the concept? The film is supposed to be a futuristic sci-fi thriller where the human race is kind of coming into conflict with AI and the development of AI, maybe 30, 40, 50 years in the future of what is now the present day. So it's interesting to see what one filmmaker's perspective of the future is and how AI will evolve over the next several decades. That's kind of what I went into it thinking about. What were your thoughts?
So, yes. And I believe Gareth mentioned in the interview that I think he started working on this in 2018. And he was just thinking about the interaction between AI and humans as AI became more sentient or much more evolved and stuff. And by the time the movie came out, he made jokes about how he wrote this taking place in 2060, but he really feels like maybe it should have been taking place in 2023, you know?
Right, because it is evolving so quickly. Yeah.
But so it is poignant, you know? I mean, we aren't dealing right now with the sentience elements of it, but we are dealing with where it's starting to affect potentially people's careers and jobs and start to replace, certain people's jobs and stuff. And so there's already this conflict before it's even really become free thinking, I guess, you know?
Yeah. Well, the obviously the trailer has shown a lot of what the environments look like, what the characters look like, what the AI beings look like. They have a very human look to them, human faces, human, physiological, structure to them, but there's the robotic component to it too. So they did make them look very human and relatable, but knowing that there is behind the mask, essentially, technology that's driving these, characters.
And right, to clarify for anybody who's watched the trailers and wondered what's what, you have your AI robots, which do not look human. They might be humanoid, but they aren't designed to look like humans. And then there's your simulants, which are designed to look human, but still show, you can still tell that they're, they don't hide the fact that they're I guess AI, but they're robots, but they are designed to, I guess, look a lot more like a human, probably for relatability and that sort of thing.
You're right. There are the human looking, technology, and then there's just technology that is not human at all. It's, machine type of stuff, robot type of stuff, droid type of stuff. So yeah, there is a differentiation.
To give a little more of the background on what's happened at this point, and this is revealed in the trailers and stuff, so I'm not giving any spoilers away. I believe this takes place in the year 2060, and it's 10 years after a war started between AI and the humans. And supposedly, the reason the war started is because presumably the U.S. had built a defense system using AI, and that AI decided to drop a nuke on downtown Los Angeles and kill, a million some odd people or so. And so the West has outlawed or banned AI, and is trying to destroy it completely before it destroys us. And some of the Eastern countries have embraced it and, live, with the AI. So you've had this war that's going on. And so most of the story takes place in 2060, but there's a lot of flashbacks to 2055, which should be 5 years into the war when a lot of the setup is. And then obviously the leading up to that time, as well. So it's a big story, a really big story. There's a lot to get through.
I was going to say it is a big story. There is a lot to get through. And when, having seen some of Gareth Edward's comments, it was a editorial cut that was much longer than what ultimately appears in theaters. And that had to be trimmed down while still allowing audiences to explain the progress that was taking place, taking longer scenes, trimming them down into much shorter scenes, but still not taking out anything that would leave the audience questioning, hey, what happened in that time frame there? So the edit was kind of interesting there too. I know that he worked with a team of editors. There were 3 editors that worked on it just based on availability. Joe Walker was involved from the start of it and did the assembly. And then when he had to leave to take on another project, I think he was going to work on Dune 2. Scott Morris and Hank Corwin came on board to work on it. And according to Gareth Edwards, Scott Morris ultimately cut and finished the film.
Yeah, as I understand, it was actually originally, I think, a 5-hour cut, which honestly, I'd like to see the 5-hour cut because you feel like a lot of stuff was cut out just so you could fit it into this 2 hour and 20-minute thing, and not to the detriment. When I was watching it, sometimes it's a little bit like they jumped a little bit, they cut earlier than I was expected, and that sort of thing, and left out some stuff. But really, when I looked at it, it's like that what happened from here to here is not really important to the storyline, and there's a lot to get through. And so I recognize it kind of became a stylistic type of editing, really. So it seemed definitely intentional, but you also knew that it had a purpose, I guess, in cutting down so much of a movie into something that you could actually watch in one sitting.
You're right, because there are different points in the story where there are big leaps from where the characters are to the next scene where they are, different place, different clothing, different scenario, and you realize time has elapsed there, but it's not necessarily relevant that you have to see every minute of how that transition took place there. So again, that's the editor to have to kind of keep the audience engaged and informed of what's going on with the story without making them feel like, hey, I feel like I've lost something here. So again, 3 editors working on it. I'm curious about your thoughts on the visual effects, because there were 1,700 visual effects, more or less, and a number of studios all worked on it. And this isn't a science fiction film in the sense of a Star Wars. This is a more modern day contemporary. Yes, it's, 30 or 40 or 50 years away from us, but it's something that somebody living today could relate to. So what do you think about the visual effects in that sense?
So let's go back a little bit because it's relating to this. So I'm going to give a little bit backstory that Gareth talked about, both at the SIGGRAPH thing and also other interviews and stuff I've read and in the press information. So Gareth, I met him a long time ago, right after he got done with Monsters. I believe you met him then as well. And when I met him, he was actually doing a presentation at Adobe's booth at NAB, where talking about how he had incorporated Premiere and especially After Effects to do the effects in post. And if you've ever seen Monsters, it was a small independent film where he shot in Central and South America. No, I mean Central and Central America and Mexico, or maybe just Central America. Anyway, so he shot it ultra guerrilla style, where he was just him and a cameraman and his actors, and they were going from location to location and shooting people in these interesting locations. And then afterwards, he did all the visual effects himself because he's a VFX guy, and that's his background. And so I thought it was pretty fascinating. I thought it was really, talking to him was interesting, and he's just this really cool guy. And so I kind of was following his career a little bit because I actually got a hold of the movie, was trying to get a hold of, and watched. I've heard about when he got Godzilla, and I thought that's awesome. He's a cool guy. It's great to see he has an opportunity. And then he got Rogue One, and just excited. And then hadn't seen anything from a while for him, so I'm excited to see this came out. Well, he explained some of what happened in the interim. I guess he said that he had never intended to make franchise films, but he said when you're a huge Godzilla fan and somebody offers you Godzilla, you're going to take it. And when Star Wars is what inspired you to want to get into filmmaking, and you're offered a Star Wars film, you're going to take it. But I believe he was either involved in Godzilla King of Monsters or was in talks with them about doing it, and he chose not to pursue that, to pursue some of his own stuff because he always wanted to make his own movies. And so even though he had, 3 successful movies under his belt, like a couple wildly successful films under his belt, he said when he went to actually get funding for his film, he said it was almost impossible to find anybody who was willing to do it. He said if you looked at the studios over the last couple of years, almost all the highest budget films have been properties. They were already either a sequel, a prequel, or they had some sort of Barbie or something like that. They've got some sort of already built-in audience built into them. He said they seem to be afraid to actually take any chances and invest in new ideas. And I think we see that a lot, And so he said he did eventually get together, I think $85 million to make this film. And looking at this film, there's no way you would think that it was done for $85 million. There's so much effects throughout the entire thing, and none of it looks cheap or like corners were cut at all. But this is where it kind of gets back to, he really did kind of go back to his roots. And I actually joked with him about this when we met. I said, that I was telling Kendra that this is kind of like Monsters too, because he's doing guerrilla style, kind of getting back to his roots. And to explain what I mean by guerrilla style for this, he went out with a small crew and filmed in these exotic locations, with us for a lot of it. I believe a Sony FX3, which is a $4,000 camera, and a vintage anamorphic cinema lens, 70s cinema lens or something like that. I could be wrong. They shot other stuff with other ones, but a lot of it, I think it was shot on this. And a lot of times they were filming lighting with battery powered handheld LEDs. And that's one of the reasons they chose the FX3 is because it has really good low light capabilities. So they could shoot with these, without having a ton of power and everything else. And he said they had a lot more flexibility being able to get into locations and shoot stuff because they didn't have a whole crew, and they could just capture stuff and hire locals and that sort of thing. And like I said, that's very similar to how they shot Monsters and stuff. But at the same time, they didn't approach it where they were shooting with, they were filming motion capture data as they did it or any of that stuff. In fact, they didn't decide which characters they were going to make be simulants or not until after the fact. And he said, he actually made a joke about how it's kind of funny that he said sometimes instead of making it be some main character that walks by, it'd be somebody leaning against a wall. And he said he would make that person into a simulant because that seems like a non-important character and stuff. So to him, it added to the realism of it and stuff. And it's just kind of funny, I think he just had fun with it. But that was one of the big challenges for ILM, and Jay Cooper talked quite a bit about this and stuff, how they had to create the motion capture data from the captured footage and do all the effects, but you would never guess that the effects were pretty much, I'm not really an afterthought, but certainly not part of the filmmaking process for a lot of the scenes.
Right. I did see in the notes that he did like you said, decide kind of after the fact who was going to be a simulant, who was going to be stay a human character and stuff, because he didn't want to influence the actors into the way they would perform, meaning like, oh, well, I know I'm going to be an AI character, so now I have to be a little more mechanical about that. So it was kind of nice to let everybody just act as they normally would, and then in post decide whether that person was going to be enhanced with visual effects or not.
You're right. That was another good point about it. And that's true when you're dealing with people. They're going to try to fit whatever. And if you want the people to be as realistic as possible, or the AI to be as realistic as possible, not letting them know they're AI is probably a good approach.
Yeah. So again, okay, that maybe does bring us to the visual effects. He's quoted as saying there were 1,700 visual effects in the feature itself, which, nowadays every film has 1,000 effects, but you really see these. And ILM obviously being one of the lead visual effects studios, but he also mentions Weta Effects, Folks VFX, Mars, Supreme Studio, Outpost VFX, Crafty Apes, Jellyfish Pictures. There's a lot of facilities that had their hand in there. But obviously, again, ILM, and Kendra is going to give us some insight onto that when she joins us. But what kind of stood out from a visual effects standpoint for you?
Well, good question. I mean, the visual effects just really worked into the story and stuff. So it wasn't so much that they stood out, that they didn't detract from the story at all. They just, they made the story work so that you believed it all. And I think that's probably the best compliment you give a VFX thing, is that usually people only really notice your VFX if you screwed them up, and if all they're doing is enhancing the story, then you've done your job right. And I think they did a great job. I mean, there's lots of questions you have about artistic choices. I mean, but a lot of this movie seemed to be kind of artistic driven and stuff, not necessarily based on the practical ideas of, is this possible? Would it really have gone this way with the development of the stuff? With the, I think you and I talked before about you see that the holes go through the head. And you see this in the trailer on Alfie, the AI girl and stuff, and you see these rotating things and stuff, and that's how they even program and everything else. And you're thinking, how practical is that? And I don't think it was worried about being practical. It was more worried about, this is a fantastic future idea. We don't have to understand it. I think I compared certain aspects of the film, without giving anything away, to reminding me of Terry Gilliam's Brazil, where there's a future where it's more advanced, but a lot of times it seems like there's some step backs that don't really make sense. And, some of these are artistic choices, but they make it interesting, and I think you also said that, what we envision the future to be and what it's going to be are going to be totally different. So once we reach that point in the future, looking back, you might think, oh, it's ridiculous. They thought it was going to go this direction. But if you kind of go creatively towards it, it doesn't matter if it matches up, because, it stands on its own as a creative piece, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying there, and what you said earlier about how this film could have been 2023, it could be 2033 or 2053 or whatever. I mean, how things will evolve in that time frame, in that, not so distant future, I think would be interesting. I mean, you could look back at this film in 2060 and say, wow, they either got it right or it was so far off of what the expectations were going to be. But I think it's hard to pin it down when you're looking at it that way. Again, with the technology, are you looking at spinning drives versus solid state? Are you looking at robots or AI that take on human form, or more of a droid type of form that you may have seen in other, science fiction type of things? What I was kind of impressed about, because I always think, what have I seen in this film that maybe hasn't been done in the past? And I don't know if it was necessarily a tremendous breakthrough, but I just thought the weaponry was pretty cool. We've all seen laser guns shooting beams and stuff like this, but these lasers seem to have more of like a tracer bullet look to them, where what you would see in modern warfare here, where they shoot, a projectile and there's a stream that follows it, for visibility. It had a little bit more of a look like that than typically your laser beam shooting across the screen. So I thought that was kind of unique. Again, the way he implemented AI into the characters, human characters, and then enhancing them through visual effects to look like that they're these simulations or simulants, I guess, or robotic type stuff. And then how, again, what the future holds as far as, are these robots going to look like droids that we are a little more familiar with from seeing like a Star Wars type of universe or not. So, I mean, it was interesting. Again, it's one person's vision. This is his story. And you have to kind of give him the liberty of what his, projection is for that.
Well, and it's very stylized, especially in the first 30 minutes and stuff. And funny thing is I went with my son and I was telling him, that it's really cool, that this film was shot on a $4,000 camera, but it has some awesome effects in it. And it's amazing that, you can film this good of a quality film on this inexpensive camera. But then like the first few scenes you're shown are like, it's relating, it's telling the backstory, and they jump back and show some like almost 60s style World of Tomorrow type stuff, of how AI is advanced. And then it cuts forward to, where they're explaining about the nuclear thing being dropped on the nuclear bomb being detonated in LA. And I'm not giving away anything here. This is all part of the setup, but when they're doing this, they have this really low res. You can see vertical line resolution and stuff. It's almost out of focus and stuff. And then it's even got jump cuts that almost seem like scenes that were shot together, different cuts, and they weren't, and even jittery motion and stuff. Like bad quality stuff. But it's stylistic and stuff. And I think they were doing their best to get through a lot of exposition without doing it in a boring way or a way that seemed like they're just, giving this long history of what's happened in the next 30 years or whatever, Yeah. And so it was definitely drawing on different, stylistic choices rather than, obviously the video quality is not going to get much worse and stuff in the future, and this, but it kept it interesting. But I thought it was funny as I'm telling my son how great this is going to look, and they're showing this horrible looking footage. It was hilarious.
You talk about that scene that pretty much sets up the storyline of the film, and again, it's this world of tomorrow, like, oh, robots are going to be your helping hand at home. They're going to help you cook and do all these different chores, and you're looking at it and being like, okay, I guess that's what they thought in the 50s and the 60s, and this is archival footage that they're putting in the film. And then you realize that, well, wait a second, that didn't happen in real life. This is something that is newly shot and being put in there, but giving the feeling of a timeline there, of a more modern time. And I think they really were successful in doing that, in combining what you think is archival footage and creating footage to make it look like it's archival, and dumbing down the quality of it to what you would expect from some of that archival material. So that was successful. I think.
It's very stylistic, and once you accept it, like, okay, yeah, I get what he's going for. This is kind of fun, then you can get through it and just enjoy the process and stuff. But yeah, it wasn't necessarily what I expected at first, but I knew what the actual film was going to look like because we saw like 5 or 10 minutes of it at the other thing. We've seen the trailers and stuff, but it was an interesting way of getting through that much setup, and you've got a lot to set up, So, because you also have to set up the characters, their history, and everything else, because it all plays in the story. Why is this person going to be here at this time? Yeah, I mean, it's all set up, but it was done in and there was a lot of jumping around, which I'm sure you and I both talked about this before. Is that sometimes you aren't exactly sure what time you're in, because it jumps to modern time, to 5 years ago, to 10 years ago, and jump in between, and it's not always clear when you're in a flashback, but it's. Yeah, it worked. It did. It just very stylistic. You never felt like you were out of the story. You kind of process that. Okay, if this character is appearing, it must have been 5 or 10 years ago, or if this is going on, it's got to be one of the future scenes there. One of the other things that impressed me a lot about this film was the soundtrack, because I saw it in a Dolby theater, so you're getting the best sound you can get there, and just the way that the sound and the subwoofer was able to add weight to the soundtrack. Obviously, all of these vehicles that you're seeing, they're visual effects. They don't exist. But to convince the audience that they are what you're seeing on screen, a lot of it is that sound design and soundtrack that is giving them the weight and the thrust of their engines and stuff. And it was pretty amazing to see these things, passing by on the screen, and to feel the power of the engines or the power of the explosives and stuff. And I credit that to the sound team that worked on it. And then the score, obviously, was a little light in the beginning, and it kind of came on later on. And initially I thought
maybe they're choosing not to use a score in this film because it was kind of light initially, and then it comes on a little later on, and it was Hans Zimmer, who's known for his obviously Academy Award winning work. He won the Oscar for The Lion King years ago. He's gone on to be successful even since then. So just interesting how much sound plays into this, because you're really dependent on that to sell those visual effects. As nice as they look, if they feel light, it doesn't convince the audience that these ships are as big as they are, as the explosives are as powerful as they are. And the sound really lays into that. And seeing it in a Dolby theater I wouldn't recommend seeing it anywhere other than that experience.
Well, and I saw it in an IMAX theater. And, it's sometimes IMAX can seem too big for me. So we sat back far enough that you had everything in your field of vision and stuff, and yeah, it didn't feel too big at all. I think it was kind of made for IMAX. I think it was, shot ultra wide screen. And so it's nice to have that more enveloping feel you get with that. So yeah, it was a good experience seeing it in IMAX. And I imagine most people think that IMAX is probably the preferred way of seeing something, but I don't know.
Yeah,
it worked.
Yeah. So this might be a good point for us to pause this part one of this podcast, knowing that we're going to have a part two coming soon, and that's going to get a little more specific on the scenes, probably have some spoilers in there, so it'll give you time to see the film. And we're going to be joined by Kendra, who will have insight into ILM's visual effects work on it. So definitely more than we can give you right now. So definitely stay tuned for part two coming up next week.